My name is Avner Kadosh, and I died on October 15, 2024. For 12 minutes I witnessed what lies beyond the veil of death, a reality so profound and terrifying that it has forever altered not just who I am, but how I perceive every breath we take in this world. What I'm about to share isn't just another near-death experience or a hallucination induced by trauma. It's a truth that strips away every comfortable lie we tell ourselves about violence, duty, and the eternal consequences of our choices. Before I tell you about my death, you need to understand who I was. I grew up in a modest apartment in Tel Aviv, the son of a career military officer and a high school teacher. My father, Colonel David Kadosh, served in the IDF for 30 years, earning commendations for valor that hung proudly on our living room wall. Every Shabbat dinner, he would remind me that serving in the IDF wasn't just about defending our country, it was about protecting our very right to exist. I never questioned this narrative. How could I? It was woven into the fabric of my existence, as natural as breathing. By the time I was 16, I could field strip an assault rifle blindfolded, a skill my father taught me in our basement, his voice full of pride. At school, I excelled in physics and mathematics, but my real passion was military history. I spent countless hours studying battle strategies, analyzing conflicts, and dreaming of the day I would don the uniform and follow in my father's footsteps. My mother, Sarah, was different. While she never openly opposed my military ambitions, I would sometimes catch her watching me with worried eyes as I practiced combat maneuvers in our backyard. "Avner," she would say, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "Remember that every soldier on every side has a mother who prays for their safe return." At the time, I dismissed her words as the natural concerns of a mother's heart. Now, after what I've seen, I understand she was touching upon a truth far deeper than I could comprehend. I enlisted in the IDF on my 18th birthday, scoring in the top percentile of my training class. The military became my world, its regulations and hierarchies as fundamental as natural laws. I excelled in urban warfare tactics, earning rapid promotions and the respect of my commanding officers. By 23, I was leading my own unit, specializing in counter-terrorism operations in high-risk zones. We were good at what we did. Too good, perhaps. Each successful mission reinforced our belief in the righteousness of our cause. We saw ourselves as defenders, protectors, warriors standing between chaos and order. When civilians died in our operations, we called it collateral damage, a sterile term that helped us sleep at night. We had our protocols, our rules of engagement, our carefully crafted justifications for every pull of the trigger. I remember one operation particularly clearly now, a raid on a suspected militant hideout in a residential area. Intelligence suggested high-ranking targets were using an apartment building as a base of operations. We went in at dawn, swift and silent, our night vision equipment turning the world into shades of green. The building's layout matched our briefing perfectly, but something felt off. The rooms were too lived in, too civilian. We found our targets, yes, but we also found families, children waking up to the sound of breaching charges and shouted commands. I remember a young girl, no more than 6, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes as I swept through her bedroom, weapon raised. In that moment, I felt a flicker of doubt, a crack in the armor of my certainty, but I pushed it down, buried it under layers of training and duty. We had our orders. The mission was successful. 3 targets eliminated, minimal civilian casualties. I received a commendation for my leadership. That night, I dreamed of the girl's eyes. It wasn't the last time, but I learned to live with the dreams, to compartmentalize them into a box labeled necessary sacrifice. We all did. It was part of being a soldier, we told ourselves, part of protecting our people, our way of life. The morning of October 15th dawned hot and clear, the sun already burning away the last traces of night by 0600 hours when I reported for duty. My unit had been tasked with patrolling a particularly sensitive area, a neighborhood that intelligence suggested was being used as a staging ground for attacks. We'd been monitoring the zone for weeks, mapping patterns, identifying potential threats. I remember every detail of that morning with crystal clarity, the weight of my gear, the taste of dust in the air, the way the light reflected off the windows of abandoned buildings. My team moved with practiced precision, each of us knowing our roles without need for discussion. 6 years of working together had forged us into something beyond mere soldiers. We were a single organism, moving with shared purpose and awareness. The first half of the patrol was routine. We logged suspicious activity, photographed potential hiding spots, maintained our presence. It was the kind of day that could lull you into complacency if you weren't careful. But we were careful. Always careful. That's what makes what happened next so ironic. At 14:32 hours, we received intel about unusual movement in our sector. Nothing concrete, just the kind of whispered warning that experience teaches you to heed. I adjusted our patrol route, taking us down a narrower street that offered better cover. The buildings pressed in close on either side, their empty windows watching us like hungry eyes. I checked my watch at 14:47, a habit born of military precision. The air felt different somehow, heavier. Later, I would wonder if some part of me sensed what was coming, if there was some divine warning I was too blind to recognize. My radio crackled with routine updates from other units, and I responded automatically, my mind already calculating our next move. That's when I saw it. A package tucked against an abandoned vehicle, partially hidden by debris. Something about its placement sent alarm bells ringing through my mind. I signaled my team to hold position, raising my fist in the universal gesture for stop. Years of training kicked in as I began the standard threat assessment protocol. I never finished it. The world erupted into brilliant, searing light. The last thing I remember thinking, with an almost detached clarity, was, "So this is how it ends." Then, darkness claimed me, and I began my journey into realms beyond mortal understanding. The doctors would later tell me that the blast threw me 20 meters, that shrapnel tore through my body armor like paper, that my heart stopped beating for 12 minutes before they managed to revive me. 12 minutes, by earthly reckoning. But time moves differently in the realm I entered. 12 minutes that contained an eternity that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and the weight of every choice we make. But before I tell you about what I saw in death, you need to understand something crucial. I wasn't a bad person. I wasn't a warmonger or a zealot. I was a soldier who believed in duty, in protecting his people, in following orders. I was someone who thought he understood the difference between right and wrong, who believed that the end could justify the means, who trusted in the system and his place within it. I was, in other words, like so many others, who carry weapons and follow orders without questioning deeply enough whether those orders align with divine truth. What I learned in death would shatter every assumption I held about duty, righteousness, and the true nature of our actions in this world. And now, as I prepare to tell you what I witnessed in those 12 minutes, what I learned about the eternal consequences of our choices, I want you to remember who I was. Remember that I was not so different from any other soldier, any other person who justifies their actions through duty or necessity. Because what I'm about to share isn't just my story. It's a warning, a revelation, and a choice that each of us must face before our own time comes. Death, when it came, wasn't like falling asleep. It was like being thrust into a reality more vivid, more real than anything I'd experienced in life. The explosion that tore through my body became a distant memory as I entered a realm where physical pain held no meaning, but where the soul could experience suffering far deeper than any earthly wound. The first sensation was one of profound displacement. Imagine being suddenly stripped of everything you've ever known about existing in a physical form. No heartbeat, no breath, no weight, no up or down. I was consciousness without form, awareness without boundaries. The closest I can come to describing it is like being suspended in an ocean of thick, heavy air, but even that fails to capture the alien nature of that state. In this formless void, I became aware of presences around me. They weren't visible in any conventional sense. Rather, I perceived them as concentrations of consciousness, each carrying its own weight of experience and emotion. Some felt familiar, like the essence of soldiers I'd known who had fallen in combat. Others were completely alien, their very nature beyond my comprehension. They moved through this space like currents in an invisible sea, some seemingly with purpose, others lost and drifting. Then came the voices. They started as whispers at the edge of awareness, growing gradually into a chorus that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. They spoke in languages I'd never heard, yet somehow I understood every word. They were voices of the dead, each telling their story, each carrying their truth. Some spoke of regret, others of anger, many of confusion and loss. But what struck me most were the voices of those who had died by violence. They carried a particular resonance that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of this realm. I began to move, or perhaps more accurately, I was drawn forward. The sensation was like being pulled through a tunnel, but not one made of physical matter. This tunnel was formed of memories, emotions, and raw truth. As I traveled through it, I experienced what I can only describe as a total dissolution of all the mental barriers I'd built throughout my life. Every justification, every rationalization, every carefully constructed belief about duty and necessity began to crumble. Along the walls of this tunnel, scenes from my life played out, but not as I remembered them. I saw every military operation I'd participated in, every shot fired, every order given. But now I saw them from all perspectives simultaneously. I experienced the last moments of those who had died in our operations, felt their fear, their confusion, their anger. I felt the grief of their families, the ripple effects of their deaths through communities and generations. I saw the young girl from that pre-dawn raid again, but this time I felt her terror as my own. I experienced the trauma that would shape her entire life, saw how it would affect her children yet unborn, understood how one moment of violence could echo through decades. The weight of this understanding was almost unbearable, yet I couldn't look away. This was truth in its purest form, stripped of all justification and excuse. The tunnel opened into a vast space that defied all earthly physics. It was a city, but not one built by human hands. The structures rose impossibly high, their surfaces seeming to shift and change as I observed them. They were made of what looked like black glass, but it was glass that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The streets beneath were paved with something that resembled polished obsidian, pulsing with an inner red glow that made them look like cooling lava. Above, where a sky should have been, there was only void, an endless darkness that seemed alive with watching presence. Through these streets moved countless souls, each trapped in their own personal revelation of truth. I saw military commanders I had known, politicians whose orders we had followed, arms dealers who had profited from conflict, each facing the full reality of their choices. But what haunted me most were the ordinary soldiers, people like me, who had simply followed orders. I watched as they experienced, as I was experiencing, the full weight of every action, every decision, every moment they had chosen obedience over conscience. In this city beyond death, I encountered souls from all sides of every conflict. I saw Israeli soldiers and Palestinian fighters locked together in a dance of mutual understanding that had come too late. I witnessed American soldiers facing the civilians they had killed in distant desert wars, Russian troops confronting the consequences of their actions in urban battles, ancient warriors from conflicts long forgotten by history, all experiencing the true impact of their choices. Then I saw something that shook me to my core: the innocent ones. They weren't suffering like the others. Instead, they stood as silent witnesses, their presence both gentle and overwhelming. Children who had died in crossfire, families caught in bombardments, civilians in the wrong place at the wrong time. They watched us with eyes that held no hatred, only a deep, profound sadness that cut deeper than any condemnation. A group of children approached me. Among them was a boy I recognized. He had died during one of our operations when we had fired on a building we had been told contained enemy combatants. We had later learned it was a civilian shelter. He looked exactly as he had in that moment, wearing the same torn shirt, his dark eyes wide with the same fear I remembered. But now those eyes held something else, a wisdom no child should have to possess. He didn't speak with words. Instead, images flooded my consciousness. His mother's face as she sang him to sleep the night before, his sister's laugh as they played football in the street that morning, his dreams of becoming a doctor, his confusion and terror in those final moments. I felt every hope that had died with him, every possibility that had been erased, every life he would have touched that would now be different because of his absence. Other spirits joined him, each sharing their story, each adding their truth to the overwhelming tapestry of understanding that was being woven through my soul. I saw the full scope of what we casually called collateral damage. Every life cut short, every future erased, every heart broken. But it wasn't just about death. I saw how violence rippled through the living, children growing up without parents, communities fractured by loss, generations haunted by trauma. In this realm, time had no meaning. I could have experienced 1,000 years of revelation in what earthly time would measure as seconds. Each moment brought new understanding, new layers of truth that stripped away more of my former certainties. I saw how every act of violence, no matter how justified it seemed in the moment, sent ripples through both time and eternity. I understood that what we called necessity or duty often served as a shield against the deeper moral truths we didn't want to face. The most profound revelation came when I began to understand the interconnected nature of all souls. In that space beyond physical reality, I could see how we were all threads in a vast tapestry, each life connected to countless others in ways we could never comprehend in our earthly existence. Every act of violence didn't just tear one thread, it created a rent in the entire fabric, damaging patterns that extended far beyond our limited mortal understanding. As this understanding deepened, the very atmosphere of this realm seemed to change. The darkness became more intense, more pressing, as if reality itself was preparing for something momentous. The souls around me began to withdraw, creating a space of profound silence. Even the children who had been my witnesses stepped back, their eyes now fixed on something beyond me. I felt it before I saw anything, a presence so vast, so ancient, and so holy that my very essence trembled in response. This was power beyond anything I could comprehend, authority that predated creation itself. In that moment, I understood what the ancient prophets meant when they spoke of falling on their faces before the divine. There was no choice involved. My soul couldn't have remained standing in the presence of such overwhelming holiness. The presence filled every corner of this vast space, and with it came a light unlike anything in physical creation. It wasn't the harsh, burning light of the explosion that had ended my earthly life, but something both softer and infinitely more powerful. This light didn't illuminate. It revealed. Under its glow, I saw myself as I truly was, stripped of every pretense and self-deception. In this light, every action I had ever taken, every choice I had ever made, became clear in its full context and consequence. But this wasn't the end of my journey. As the light grew stronger and the presence drew nearer, I realized I was about to face something even more profound, a direct encounter with divine truth itself. What happened next would reshape not just my understanding of life and death, but the very nature of existence itself. In that moment of complete surrender, when my soul lay bare before the divine presence, everything changed. The overwhelming light that had filled the space began to concentrate, taking form before me. And there he stood, Jesus Christ, not as the gentle figure from religious paintings, but as the King of Kings, the Judge of all souls, radiating power that made my military experiences of authority seem like child's play. His appearance defied earthly description. He was light and truth embodied, power clothed in love, justice tempered with mercy. His eyes held the weight of eternity, yet they looked at me with such personal recognition that I felt simultaneously exposed and embraced. This wasn't the Jesus of casual religious conversation or theological debate. This was the living Lord of all creation, and his presence rewrote everything I thought I knew about reality. Avner, he spoke, and my name in his voice carried the weight of every moment I had lived, every choice I had made. You have seen the truth of your actions. Now see them through my eyes. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. I began to experience every moment of my military service from his perspective. I felt his heart break with every life taken, his grief for every family torn apart, his sorrow for every soldier on both sides who had forgotten their divine nature in the name of duty. But it wasn't just the obvious moments of violence. I saw how every small choice, every moment of choosing fear over love, hatred over understanding, had contributed to the larger tapestry of suffering. "I gave you life to bring life," he continued, his words resonating through every facet of my being. "I created you to be a bearer of light, not a dealer of darkness. Each soul you encountered was precious to me, friend and foe alike, every civilian, every soldier, every child caught in the crossfire. They were all my beloved children." The weight of this truth was almost unbearable. I saw how every military operation, every tactical decision, every pulled trigger had rippled through the spiritual realm. Actions I had justified as necessary for security had torn holes in the fabric of divine love. Orders I had followed without question had violated the deeper commands written into the very nature of creation. But then something unexpected happened. Jesus stepped closer, and I felt waves of love washing over me. Love so pure and powerful it began to heal wounds in my soul I hadn't even known existed. This wasn't the love of greeting cards or casual affection. This was the foundational force of the universe, the power that held atoms together and gave meaning to existence itself. "Your hands have dealt in death," he said, his voice both thunder and whisper, "but I am offering you the chance to become a bearer of life. The training you received, the leadership skills you developed, the courage you cultivated, these were not given to you for destruction. They were given for protection, for healing, for building bridges where others see only walls." Images began to flow through my consciousness, possibilities of what my life could become. I saw myself working with trauma survivors, both soldiers and civilians. I saw myself building programs for reconciliation, using my military experience to help others understand the true cost of violence. I saw myself standing between opposing forces, no longer as a warrior, but as a peacemaker. "But understand this," he continued, his expression becoming more serious, if that was possible. "The path I am showing you will not be easy. Many will not understand. Some will call you traitor, coward, deserter. You will lose friends, respect, position. Are you willing to pay this price for truth?" The question hung in the eternal space between us. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just about changing careers or adopting new beliefs. This was about fundamental transformation, about choosing a completely different way of existing in the world. The cost would be enormous, but the cost of returning unchanged, knowing what I now knew, would be infinitely greater. "Yes, Lord," I answered, and those words carried the weight of the most binding covenant I had ever made. He smiled then, and it was like watching the dawn break over creation. "Remember this moment," he said. "Remember what you have seen. Remember that every soul you encounter, friend or enemy, ally or opponent, is precious to me. Remember that there is no such thing as acceptable loss in my kingdom." Then he reached out and touched my forehead. In that touch, I felt love and power and purpose pour into my being. But more than that, I felt a deep healing begin, not just of my physical wounds, but of my soul itself. Years of trauma, of hardened emotions, of justified violence began to dissolve under that touch. "Go now," he said. "Return and tell what you have seen. Be my witness not just in words, but in the way you live. Show them there is another way." The scene began to fade, the divine presence becoming less intense, though I desperately wanted to stay. I felt myself being pulled back, away from that realm of perfect truth and justice, back toward the world of the living. But I carried with me something that could never be taken away: the memory of those moments, the truth I had witnessed, the love I had experienced. I gasped back to life on the battlefield, my body racked with pain from the explosion. The medics later told me they had been about to pronounce me dead. My heart had stopped beating for 12 minutes. 12 minutes that had contained an eternity, 12 minutes that had forever altered the course of my life. The physical recovery was challenging, but it was nothing compared to the spiritual and emotional transformation I was undergoing. How do you return to normal life when you've experienced the most profound truth of existence? How do you continue with business as usual when you've seen the eternal consequences of every action? The answer is, you don't. You can't. Within weeks of my physical recovery, I submitted my resignation from the IDF. It wasn't an easy decision, and it wasn't well received. My father, the career military man, couldn't understand what he saw as a betrayal of everything we had fought for. My commanding officers suggested I was suffering from PTSD and needed psychological evaluation. My fellow soldiers looked at me with a mixture of confusion and contempt. How could I explain to them that I had seen the true reality behind all our justifications? How could I make them understand that I had witnessed the eternal impact of what we called military necessity? That I had seen how every act of violence, no matter how well justified, tore at the fabric of divine love? Instead of trying to explain the inexplicable, I began to act on what I had learned. I used my military pension to fund a small nonprofit organization focused on peacebuilding and reconciliation. We started working with former soldiers from both sides of the conflict, creating spaces for dialogue and understanding. We developed programs for children affected by violence, helping them process their trauma and find paths to healing. It wasn't easy. There were death threats from extremists on both sides. Former friends accused me of betraying our cause. Some family members stopped speaking to me. But for every person who turned away, someone else seemed to recognize the truth in what I was saying and doing. Slowly, our work began to bear fruit. We saw former enemies become friends, watched hatred transform into understanding, witnessed the healing power of truth spoken in love. Each small victory reminded me of what Jesus had shown me, that every soul was precious, that every life touched rippled through eternity. Today, 5 years after my near-death experience, I continue this work. The memories of what I witnessed haven't faded. If anything, they've grown clearer with time. I see now that my military training wasn't wasted. It was preparation for a different kind of battle. Instead of fighting against flesh and blood, I now fight against the powers of hatred, fear, and division that drive us to violence. I still serve my country, but in a way that aligns with divine truth rather than human politics. I still stand for protection of the innocent, but through the power of reconciliation rather than the force of arms. I still believe in sacrifice, but now I sacrifice comfort and reputation rather than lives and futures. The boy I saw in that realm beyond death, the one who died in our military operation, his eyes still haunt me. But now they drive me forward rather than holding me in guilt. Every child we help, every soldier we guide toward peace, every bridge we build between communities honors his memory and moves us one step closer to the world Jesus showed me was possible. My name is Avner Kadosh, and I died on October 15, 2024. But more importantly, I was reborn, not just physically, but spiritually. The truth I witnessed in those 12 minutes has become my life's mission. Whether you believe my story or not, I ask you to consider its message. Every soul is precious. Every action has eternal consequences, and there is always another way if we have the courage to choose it. In the end, this isn't just my story. It's a call to each of us to examine our choices, to question our justifications, to consider the eternal impact of our actions. Because one day, we will all stand in that light of perfect truth. And when we do, the only question that will matter is, what did we do with the life we were given?